start with that bit. I'm a dad, wife, 3 children, 14, 12 and 8, living at the moment of the last 6 months in on and off lockdown, I guess. So with all the challenges that most of us are going through, look, I had a very wonderful, varied career, with very different shapes and layers and paths, I guess. Primarily, I guess, I've always been an entrepreneur, so probably that's where it all starts. I've always been very entrepreneurial. I've always had a business going in some kind. I've always been involved in building businesses. I've sold businesses. I invest in businesses. I'm an angel investor, so I've always liked the idea of creating value, I say, rather than extracting value. Extracting value is one of those things that you do at university, right? In general, when you go to uni, you get taught a particular, trade or a particular degree, and then when you go into the market, you extract value from a market that already exists. Entrepreneurialism tends to be a bit different because you have to go and invent the value, right? It doesn't exist. You have to go and create the opportunity. So I've always been obsessed with that. I've had an amazing corporate career, I guess. Not that I chose, but it kind of fell in my lap. Once upon a time, my mother-in-law says to me, "There's a job at Lonely Planet. Why don't you apply?" And being a fanatic traveler that I was, and I am still, a job at Lonely Planet sounded like a dream. So I applied, and while I was doing entrepreneurial stuff on the side, I held a full-time corporate role that grew from designer to eventually becoming the executive director of Lonely Planet and moving to the US and living around the world and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. So it's a mixture of executive corporate experience with I was the head of innovation for that company for quite a while. So I had the incredible, I call it a privilege of working with some amazing companies at the birth of apps and mobile phones and various other things. So I got to see some incredible evolutions of, and devolutions of companies like Nokia and Amazon and Apple and you name it. These days, look, I finished my corporate life. These days, I'm more focused on my own businesses. I've got a couple of businesses that I run, my portfolio of investments and dedicating my time to traveling, to spend time with my kids. And I fell into this whole thing of presenting and doing keynotes and sharing stories with people only because, seems to be that I can talk, so there you go. I'll do it. Big fan of regional, and I'm a big fan of small businesses and medium-sized businesses. And I tell you why. I think, I guess in my portfolio, my angel investment, role, and living in Melbourne, and having been involved in the startup scene, I used to work a lot in Silicon Valley and spent a ton of time working with the coolest kind of startups. We often tend to forget that, a small business is probably not that dissimilar to a startup in almost every way, except for a couple little, tiny bits that you could argue that are different. But in general terms, the same. And often they fall off the radar because it's like, a small business gets taken care of by, by government or by council or by something else, but not by the big machine of, venture capital or co-working spaces or all these other, buzz that goes around the world. But I'm a massive fan. I mean, I grew up in a regional little place, in a tiny little place in the middle of absolutely nowhere in Patagonia. One of those places that you grow up and your life is being already decided, on your behalf by your family and your friends, basically, because, this is what's going to happen to you. And I kind of, felt that, the world was bigger than just my little tiny regional town and I could go further, and I did. So I'm a big fan of going to the region as often as I can. I do a lot of, in fact, every year I dedicate a large chunk of my time and effort into going regional and presenting and sharing stories and shaking things up in region. In Victoria, I do it a lot, all the way from Mildura all the way to Gippsland and the other end. But gosh, I've did keynotes in Kalgoorlie, in Karatha, in Katherine in Northern Territory. I've done them everywhere because I'm such a big fan of going regional. And look, what I'm going to talk about is what I talk to all business about, all the lessons that I've learned over the last 25 years of being in business, I guess. I had the wonderful, like I said, privilege of experiencing an enormous amount of growth in technology and in an industry which was media at a point in time where, everything was up in the air and everything got redesigned and reinvented. So I dealt and I got the battle scars of transformation, of disruption, of adaptability, and what it takes to be able to adapt and keep up with times. So the stories I share are really practical, really simple. All my battle scars, all the shit that I say to people, hey, don't screw this one up, or be careful with this one, or watch out for that one, and it's only in the spirit of making sure that everyone gets, as much provocation as possible to not ignore the importance of adaptability and making sure that you keep up with the times and you keep up with transformation. I mean, gosh, more than ever now. I've been talking about potential pandemics since before this pandemic, and now it's happening, and it's like clients are calling me going, Gus, you predicted it. I'm going, I wasn't predicting anything. I was just saying, always be ready for change, because it's inevitable and it will continue to accelerate. So be ready for it. You got nothing to lose. I always say, one of the most beautiful strategies I always say to my children, one of the most beautiful attitudes you could have towards life is to be able to suspend your disbelief. Always suspend your disbelief. And try it. Novelty is one of the most critical things you could ever apply to your brain. If you stop, providing your brain with novelty, if you starve your brain of novelty, your adaptability will disappear on the spot, because your brain will just get used to doing the same thing over and over again. And if you've got a context and a group of friends and so on that continues to operate the same way, the same thing, day after day after day after day, and you don't go out to listen to new thoughts or read new books or encourage the provocation and the novelty that comes from discomfort, then you'll fall in that path, and when shit changes, you won't be able to keep up with it because you just got so used to it. So if there's one reason that you should come and listen and engage in this whole program and in this event, is novelty and provocation. Do not underestimate it. It's absolutely critical for your business and for your own personal life, to be honest. I mean, life doesn't become, exciting on its own. You have to make it exciting. So you have to go and seek that stuff.